Shalom Rabbi and Shlita. How are you?
Okay, we're live.
Okay. So the progression was going to take us to Yudaria di Modena, and I would like to do a review of some of his Sfarim, his Chaye Yehuda, his Midbar Yehuda, his Yehagarye, his different Sfarim that I think are noteworthy and interesting. But there was such a division between the last to this that I was going to spend a drop more time in being makdim. It'll be a little bit, I would say, circumnavigatorial, a little, out of the, until we get to him. And then when we start talking about him, I don't want to do so much a biography. I want to do it through his Agadic interpretations in Haboine, in his Pirush on the Agoda, which is very questionable and I would say even interesting, but it's very noteworthy. Now, Taramei Choli, I want to say like this. I once read a book called Thinking in Pictures by somebody named Temple Grandin. Now, Temple Grandin is an autistic individual. She's 72 years old today. Her mother is actually still alive. I'm very proud of her. I'm very proud of raising her and the accomplishments that Temple actually reached and brought to the world. I'll tell you a little bit about her, and the reason I'm mentioning her is for a specific point, a Zaitik point, but an interesting point. She is autistic, I would say, before the understanding of autism, certainly Aspergerian, before the understanding of Asperger's. And she was the daughter of a very, very wealthy couple. They did get divorced when she was younger, but they were resolute in raising her in the best way possible. Being that they were so wealthy, they were able to afford an institution that sort of worked around her. That means it was almost like 10 or 20 people on staff to manage her. One person was for personal hygiene, one was for managing her schedule, the other one was for education. And slowly they mined the Yokar Mizoilel over here. They took out the brilliant mind, and they were able to somehow bring her to the world and have her produce something that was amazing. Now, what was her gift to the world? It was a number of gifts. One was, being that she understood autism and autistics very well, she created what was known as the hug box or the squeeze machine. She had a certain type of closeness where she could instruct the caregiver, and the caregiver would understand when it's invasive, when it's not invasive, what exactly the autistic is feeling, when he's feeling compromised. And that was something that, because she was able to be masber, she was able to somehow perfect it, dilute it, distill it, and bring it to the world. But what's also, and equally as important, is she's responsible for restructuring and refurbishing, I think, at this point, close to a third or more of the slaughterhouses in the United States and the world over. She's gone to Israel. What she does is from the perspective of the animal, she's able to figure out what exactly bothers the animal and why they won't walk towards the slaughter the way they're supposed to, why there are glitches, why do they stop all of a sudden. And because she sees things very differently, and she takes a tour, a personal tour, down the chute and the conveyor that every animal is going to have to make, she's able to notice things and instruct different plants. I think she worked for Rubashkin also, instruct different plants in methods of perfection and methods of humaneness that makes shchita that much more, and general killing of the animal that much more acceptable. She's not a proponent of PETA. She doesn't believe that the world should be without animal consumption. She believes very strongly in animal consumption. She just is a strong advocate of doing it in the most humane possible way. Now, I think in the book Thinking in Pictures, I think she writes that she went through, and this is a non-Jew, she went through, I think, the whole of Tractate Chulin with the Art Scroll translation, meaning she was very interested in the ritual understanding and the halachic understanding. I'm not sure she understood the Mugramta, the Rav and Shmuel. I'm not sure she understood the full sugyas of, intricacies of the Lamdas of Shchita, But on a rudimentary level, on a basic level, it seems like she did understand it and she did go through it. And it's an amazing thing. I think she was duly impressed by the advanced understanding that the rabbis had of the animal mind, a din that is not in the Gemara, but it is brought down in the Paiskim, that the animal cannot see the knife as it's being prepared for slaughter, because the animal does understand that the knife is an instrument that's going to actually put it out of its life, and it does spook the animal. And she understood these things to be very advanced in areas of humaneness. Now, the Nakuda that I'm talking about is that her interest in Masechta Chulin and the fact that she read it with the Art Scroll. The Art Scroll is not the first translator of a Shas. We had other Mitargimim that came well before Art Scroll, but Art Scroll is by far the most sophisticated, probably the most ubiquitous. It's all over the world. Everybody's got Art Scroll, whether it's in Hebrew or English. I do believe that they have Art Scroll in other languages, but Art Scroll is not the first. And I want to talk a little bit about a mevucha and a big machlokes, a pulmus that happened in the late 1830s, early 1840s, about the Shas that was the first, or attempt at the first translation by a Jew. The Shas, parts of it were translated well before the 1840s. Those of you that are familiar with the famous pulmus, the pulmus of Paris, where in the 1230s, Nicolas Donin, who was a Jew, who was a mumar, Nicolas Donin de la Rochelle, translated 35 large portions of the Talmud with an effort to show the world how blaspheming the Talmud is and how nefarious the Talmud is. And he succeeded in causing a public debate. And four of the great Balei HaTaisis, Rav Yechiel of Paris, I think Rav Mishulam of Melun, I'm not sure who the others were. I remember Rabbeinu Shloima, J.D. Eisenstein in the Oitza Vikuchim brings down in prologue to the Vikuach the full story of what happened. But this was, I would say, one of the first times that parts of the Shas were translated, but it was L'Shimtza. It was a horrible thing. It wasn't translated with an effort to benefit people. It was translated with an effort towards anti-Semitism. It was V'roda Bochem Seinechem, Bochem Nikem. He was a Jew. And the truth is the result of that Vikuach saw the destruction and the burning of the Talmud in 1242. The famous Kinnah by the Marami Rutenberg, Shali Srufa Ba'esh, was written on the Nicholas Donin debate, which was seen by the Pope Gregory as a tremendous victory to the Franciscans and a loss to the Jews. And as a result, the Shas was burned. Yeah, I would say that probably was the first time that parts of the Shas were translated, and it was something that we suffered greatly by. Interesting, I just want to mention, just in case people want a source, there in 2005, there was a very large coffee table book that was put out by Yeshiva University Museum, and it was about the translation and the publishing of the Talmud. It was done under the sponsorship of Jerome Schottenstein, and there's a collection of tremendous articles. One of them is an article, I think it's on page 121. It's an article by Adam Mintz. He's the husband of the person that put this tremendous book together. Her name is Sharon Lieberman Mintz, and he has a great article called The Talmud in Translation. And he chronicles a lot of the different translations and how they were greeted and what was wrong with them, what was good with them. I think he does bring down the first translation by Nicholas Donin. Then, notably, there was in the 1690s, in the late 1690s, there was a Dutch non-Jew who was a big Hebraist. He was a very big Choivev, Yadus, Choivev, Lashon Kodesh, and he translated the Mishnah. His name was William Schurenhuis, and he translated, I think, the whole Mishnayos with the Pirush Rambam and the Pirush Rabbi Vadia of Bartanura. In the 1750s, there was a Jew who was a Mumar who also translated 17 to 20 volumes of the Mishnah. His name was Ugolini, Blasio di Ugolini. I once owned, I don't have it anymore, I once owned the full translation of the Mishnayos by Jacob Rabe, who was also a non-Jew. But these were people that were translating the Talmud, the Mishnah, with an intention of knowledge, not with an intention of anti-Semitism, not with any negative intention. It was with an intention of knowledge. And the idea was for all the Hebraists, it must be understood that when America was in its inception, there was a tzad that the national language was going to be Hebrew. It was a fleeting thought. It never happened, but there was a tremendous interest in the biblical language of Hebrew. So today, we almost see it like it's almost anachronistic. Only specialized people speak and understand, the Bible language, but unless you're in Israel. But back then, there was a tremendous interest in it. The anti-Semites who, after that, Eisenmenger and others who translated parts of the Talmud, those kayadua, there was no interest in education at all. It was pure propaganda, and therefore it's not an important thing to mention them. The first person that actually tried and made a very big effort to translate the full, complete Talmud was a fellow by the name of Moshe Ephraim Pinner. He started in the 1830s. He actually lived a pretty long life. And the only thing he ever got off the ground was a volume of brachas. I don't know if you could see how big this is. This is like a full folio. It's larger than any shas. It doesn't fit in any of my shelves. It lies in every, I have to lie it down. And this is a Masechta Brachas. And I'll just show you, we'll talk on it for a second. The Masechta Brachas, I don't know if can you see it? It's a Masechta Brachas. I'll tell you what he did and what the Yichud was. It's the first of supposed the full Bavli and Yerushalmi, which he was intending on publishing all by himself. And it was going to take 8 years. And he had very big plans. Lamaisa, all that got off the ground was this volume of brachas. And we'll talk on it as to why and what happened and what went wrong. He was a Talmud of the Nesivos. He was also known by Rabbi Kiva Eger. The Chassam Sofer met him. People were impressed with his Chochmas HaTorah. He was versed in Gemara, not Ke'echad HaGedolim, but he was very well versed in Gemara. He went on after his yeshiva days, he went on to study in academy and university, and he became very proficient in language. And he felt that it was very important to put the Talmud down in German, to put it in a vernacular and make it accessible to the Amcha. A venture like this was extremely expensive, and he decided to go out and get prenumeranten. Prenumeranten, again, we might have explained it in the past, was subscriptions. The idea was book publishing was expensive. If people would put down Demei Kedima, front money, and they would be subscribers, so he could have the money that he needs to work and to print, to work and to print. And these prenumeranten often covered the full expense of a book. Today, it's not such a real concept. Yeshivas sometimes do it when they want to send out a book. They get what the equivalent of the old-time prenumeranten is. Now, what he did was, in order to make it successful, he was a flamboyant person with, I would say, a very good knack for sales. He went to Tsar Nikolai I, the Russian Tsar, and he explained to him through his minister of education, who was a Jew that apostated, he explained to him that if he would be able to translate the Talmud in Russian, in German, and German was almost a universal language, so then in that case, what would happen is that Jews all over would start learning German. And that would solve the Tsar's Jewish problem. The Tsar was a very big anti-Semite, but he was an anti-Semite with purpose. He wanted very much to integrate the Jewish people into the fabric and structure of Russia, at least into the fabric and structure of Westernism, of modernism. So he was sold on the idea that if the Jew would have to learn his Talmud in German, German would also get a haramas keren. German would also become something that would be a lingua franca, and that was good for him. Some of the Tsars were German also. I think Paul II was German. Katerina might have been German. It was not unacceptable for them at all. What he didn't realize was it was just a sales gimmick. It was with the intention of getting the Tsar to plunk down 100 subscriptions, which was a Hein Rav, a tremendous amount of money. It would go a very long way for him. But he never had intentions of teaching Jewish people German. He had an intention of giving German people Talmud. In fact, L'shvacha Ye'omer, Pinner was not completely a bad guy. L'shvacha Ye'omer, it has to be said in sort of his honor and defense, that his intention was to bring the Talmud to all people, and even people that weren't so affiliated, sort of what ArtScroll did today. Now, in the first volume, you'll see the first page. I don't know if, can you see that, Ellie? Can you read it? It says, Seine Majesty Nicholas Kaiser von Russland. This is German, and this is the first prenumerant. You see how big it is? It's like what we would call today a founder's page in a journal. It's a founder's page in a journal. It's a big full-size page dedicated to Nicholas I, who's this Kaiser of Russia, dem Größen und Tachtreichen Monarchen, this great and very honorable king. And then he goes on to have a whole write-up about him, thanking him. And then there's pages and pages of Rabbanim and professors that dedicated tremendous amounts of money, 2 pages actually to be exact, 2 pages, but hundreds of names, dedicated a lot of money to give this person the ability to print what they saw was a very important venture. Okay. He, as a come-on, printed a small sort of monograph, which was excerpts of Bavli and Yerushalmi with his German vernacular, and he tried to get people interested in it. It was relatively okay. The interesting thing is the first person that went out against it was Shadal in a journal called Kerem Chemed. This is the famous journal called Kerem Chemed. It was actually a spot where, if you look, it says, could you read it, Eli? What does it say over there? Right. So, and it was really just sort of like a landing spot for many maskilim to put their ideas on paper. Shadal, Shmuel David Lutzato, who was a maskil from Trieste, from maskil, a maskil that was a Shema Torah mitzvahs. I remember one time, I don't say this on my own, I was walking on King's Highway and I saw Rabbi Victor Miller there. And I stopped him and I asked him if I could talk to him for a few minutes. I had a few questions. And he said, I'm a slow walker. I said, I'm a man of leisure. I have a lot of time. And he said, all right, so walk with me. And I asked him different questions about individuals. I knew that he knew a lot about the different maskilim. And for the most part, he didn't like any of them. When I asked him about Shadal, so he picked up his hand like this. He says, Shadal, he says, Toiros hayemes ve'emunos hayemes. I said, his treatise against Mila. He says, listen to me, Shadal, Toiros hayemes ve'emunos hayemes. This is very interesting to me. I'm just telling you over a story exactly the way it happened. There's very few words. I can't blunder those words. It's very, like that's what he told me. Now, and for years, I've read different things from Shadal that were actually, but I understand what made him say this. If you read these 5 pages in Kerem Chemed, where Shadal destroys, eviscerates Pinner, and he writes that he went through the monograph, and he says the man has absolutely no logical sense, he has no philological sense, and he has no integrity to text. He has absolutely nothing. And in each one of the accusations, he brings 5, 6 tainas. And he shows that the Talmud, which is a national jewel, something that's priceless, it's something that's mamishar, oitzar chemda, he says to give this individual right to go down in it, into lasis boikesh shaloi, he says it's a travesty of epic proportion. He says, how could this be accepted? It's not, he says, thank God, he says, I didn't give him any to make dima to help him and assist him in this horrible venture. Now, the first person that writes like this is Shadal. What's strange is that many Rabbanim from the mid-1930s, like 1935, he methodically started collecting Haskamas from person to person. I want to tell you some of the people that he collected the Haskamas from. He methodically was collecting the Haskamas, approbations from person to person, till he had a nice, robust cache of letters. And this he publishes in the front of his Sefer, and anybody looking at it is extremely impressed. The guy did curry favor with many, many individuals of prominence. So I'll tell you some of the people. I wrote some of them down. After getting, I would say, that tremendous disappointment from Shadal, he went to Emden, which is a city in Germany, and he met Rabbi Avram Lewenstam. Rabbi Avram Lewenstam was a very important Haskama. He was one of the biggest fighters against the Haskalah. He wrote a sefer called Swer HaChaim, and in it there are 9 large essays against every form of modernization, from music in the shul to changing the Nusach HaTfilah to German to different restructurings of the synagogue. He was a shamrani to the nth degree. To get a haskama from this individual was extremely valuable. It was a wonderful thing. And he was able to convince Lewenstam that his Gemara is going to be a very big help. Not only won't it assist in modernization, it'll revert a lot of the different modern people and make them much more Talmudical, which is truly what he believed. It's very hard to sell something if you don't believe it. It's truly what he believed. And Lewenstam gave him a very warm haskama. He got a haskama from Reb Shlomo Zalman Trier, who was from Frankfurt. That's, okay, not as important. Another haskama he got was from Mendel Deutz. Mendel Deutz was the person that was at the forefront of machine matzahs. He was the matir, one of the principal matirim of machine matzahs. So he was a bit of a person who was out there. He was a French rabbi, and he was considered very open-minded. That wasn't such a hard haskama to get. He also got, from some of you are familiar maybe with Moshe Kunitz. At some point we'll talk about him. Moshe Kunitz was the famous author of the Ben Yochai. Now, Ben Yochai is a book defending the Zohar from a lot of the arguments that Rav Yaakov Emden wrote in his Mitpach HaSfarim. And Ben Yochai is sort of the response to it, which is interesting because why? Which is interesting because Moshe Kunitz was himself a maskil, so that he was taking the line of defense against Rabbi Yaakov Emden is very suspect, but he was a Talmud Chacham by every stretch, and he did give a haskama to this. Moshe Kunitz Meuvan is very prominent. What's interesting to me over here is there's one haskama from somebody named Avram Stern from Varsha. Avram Stern was not a Talmud Chacham. I mean, he might have been a Talmud Chacham, but he wasn't a Rav. He wasn't a Talmud Chacham. He was a songwriter, but he wasn't only a songwriter. He was an inventor. He was probably the first inventor of the computer. He was somebody that worked as a bookkeeper for the Duke of Horbashov. I think that's what it was. And he created a counting machine, which was improved on and improved until it ultimately became the computer. He was a very prominent mathematician and a very important astronomer. If you look at his Wikipedia page, you'll see a Yid with a very long beard. He was a strong anti-Hasidic polemicist. He wrote many songs against Hasidim. He was the father-in-law of Chaim Zev Slonimsky. I'm not sure how from he was, the Orech of Atzfira, but this interesting individual, I want to just tell you why it's so fascinating to me. This interesting individual was he's brought down by the Shoel Moshe. Eli, maybe you want to mute everybody to make it much easier. He's brought down by the Shoel Moshe. The Shoel Moshe makes an argument supporting the idea of intellectual property. It's a machlekes between him and Rav Motche Banet. The Shoel Moshe believes that if you create something, it belongs to you. If you write a sefer, you have an automatic copyright. If you create a machine, it's automatically patented to you. You don't have to go and apply to a patent office in order to get that. And he has a few rayas. One of his principal rayas, I remember, he says like this, Shaharei, he says, our Torah should be any different than secular law? He says, Shaharei Yadua, Sha'avram Horbashev, Osa Mechoina, Avram of Horbashev, that's this fellow Stern, made a machine, and the Moishel, the Duchas, gave him a pension for the rest of his life for the machine that he made. Why? Because he created something and it was understood that everybody's going to use it, and therefore he deserved compensation for his creation. And the Shalom Aleichem continues. He says he's basically advocating the concept of natural law. He's saying, you see that this is the normal understanding of things. You see that when people have to make laws that protect one another from different types of poaching and different irregularities in business activity, they'll pay for a creation. So there's no reason that we in our Torah should not pay for a creation also. But he interestingly, he quotes this Avram Stern of Horbashev. Avram Stern of Horbashev is the only one. Everybody's writing Haskamas. He writes in the middle of all the Haskamas, he writes a song about that. I don't know if you could see it over here, right over here. There's a nice song, and it's Avram Stern. And he's from Varsha. At the point that he's writing, he's already living in Varsha. He dies about a year after the publication of this Sefer, Azokin Sva Yomim. It's a very interesting thing to me that he was so complete and so comprehensive in all the Haskamas that he took. He took from every side, he took from every angle. The idea was to try to make sure that this would be very similar to what Art Scroll did. When you look at Art Scroll's Haskamas, they're from the Chassidim, they're from the Sephardim, they're from the Litvisha, they're from the Rabbanim. They took from every cross-section of Klal Yisrael. Why? Because this is a Gemara, and they did it very wisely, and they did it very successfully. This is a Gemara that's going to be used by everybody, and this is what Pinner was trying to do. So, Moshe, whatever what was. The interesting thing is Beini during these bunch of years. Now you have to realize the Chassam Sofer passes away in 1839. So in 1837, 2 years before the Chassam Sofer passes away, Pinner succeeds in getting a haskama from the Chassam Sofer. It's a rather decent haskama. Chassam Sofer, who we know was one of the biggest and most important people that were oimdim b'peretz. Anything new chodesh asam in Torah is attributed to the Chassam Sofer, but he gave Pinner a haskama, and he understood that this had a tremendous value. He understood that introducing the Shas to the hoi polloi would be very valuable. He understood what could happen then is what's happening today, where everybody's knowing Gemaras, learning Gemaras, involved with Gemaras. The Chassam Sofer saw this, and he gave him a very warm haskama. And the emesis is that, according to historians, at least Rabbi Greenwald from Columbus, Ohio, in his Oitzer Nechmad, and Adam Mintz in his article in the printing of the Talmud, page 211, and others I've seen in Sefer Yerusha Seinu by volume 3, by somebody, an article by Yechiel Goldhaber, a very good article about this Shas also. I think almost all of them sort of agree that the reason this venture was scuttled was because of this tremendous mevucha with the Chassam Sofer. And I'll explain. The Chassam Sofer gave a warm haskama. And in theory, that haskama had biyacholta, it had in its ability, it would create a smooth sailing for this whole Shas to be printed from beginning to end. Except in Amsterdam, there was a banker. He wasn't even a rabbi. He was a banker. His name was Tzvi Hirsch Leren. He was one of the three Leren brothers. Moshe, the middle brother, Akiva, the youngest. It's interesting, Akiva, the youngest, ended up marrying Tzvi Hirsch's daughter. So it was three brothers, but one was a father-in-law, son-in-law. They were extremely wealthy. They carried a tremendous amount of the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael. Ironically, Tzvi Hirsch Leren never went to Eretz Yisrael. He never wanted to step foot in Eretz Yisrael, felt he wasn't worthy. He was a remarkable kanoi. He opposed almost everything from hospitals in Eretz Yisrael that might import doctors that had improper hashkafas to the Gemara that Pinner was looking to translate and export all over Klal Yisrael. He opposed everything. And in this opposition, he was strong, he was fearless, and he had a lot of money to spread his position very thoroughly. And he started working on the Chassam Sofer. Hearing that the Chassam Sofer gave a haskam on this, he was very agitated by it, and he slowly chipped away. It's believed that probably his pressure is what caused the Chassam Sofer to renege and to take back his haskam. Chassam Sofer never did something like that in his life. but this was the one time where the Chassam Sofer did take back his Haskama. He contacted Pinner and asked him to please give him back the letter of Haskama, and Pinner rejected it. He says, you gave it, you gave it. He did not give it back to him, and the Chassam Sofer was broken. And he wrote a letter, a follow-up letter after the Haskama, which I'll share with you shortly. But what was Leren's basic opposition to this translation? Leren had 3 key points. One point was he found mistakes. Now, it has to be noted, and could be people will argue with me. At one point, and I didn't do this recently, at one point I did look into a lot of what Tzvi Hirsch Leren wrote. And I'm not anybody, but I didn't find him to be a Weltstam Chacham. I found him to be a Yedeya with a very acerbic pen. A lot of his writings are full of spelling errors, which is always interesting to me. I find spelling errors very telling. He's very quick to shoot. Some of his targets were Moses Montefiore, some of the Rishon LeZions in Eretz Yisrael. He's very quick to shoot. No denying that he was a great man, and no denying that the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael would have been impossible without him. But again, I think that his kanos was ma'alu me'aver. His points were 3 points. One point was he found mistakes. And I'll share with you just one sample of a mistake that he felt was very important. And this mistake he felt was so overwhelming that he wrote Yutzak Efer Zov Reisach L'Techpiv Shel whatever Hai Gavra. He says it's kfir, it's apikourses. Well, okay, I'm not saying you're going to like the pshat, but in the famous Gemara where Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah discusses with his wife the possibility of being a nasi after the demotion of Rav Gamliel, and he goes home and he asks his wife, and his wife is not so happy with the idea. But he decides to do it anyhow and says, Israchash Lanisa that night. And what happens? He gets Tamnis Sari Dara the Sarachibar, something like that. He gets 18 rows of white hair. Israchash Lanisa. So Pinner asked, what's the ness? What exactly happened? He says, I'll be masbet to you. He says, when Napoleon was rampaging through Europe, and there was a shmua that he captured the Pope and was taking the Pope to the French Bastille to incarcerate him, there was a cardinal in Rome that heard about this, and the pain that he suffered from that erroneous shmua, from something that wasn't true, caused him to turn white over a few hours. So he says, you know what happened over here? When Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah realized that he's going to take on the Nesius, and he's so young, Israchash Leinisa, the ness happened, and the fright and the aims of the tzibura was so overwhelming, he turned white. He turned white. He says, Chazal didn't know of this phenomenon, so they said Israchash Leinisa. Now, that last part he could have left off. He didn't have to say Israchash Leinisa is Chazal's lack of knowledge, maskim. But okay, this is kfir. This is so overwhelming. Okay, I hear. Okay, I'm just saying this is taina number 1 that Reb Tzvi Hirsch Leren levels against Moshe Ephraim Pinner. Taina number 2, he says, how could you translate anything? He says it's a terrible thing to translate something. Tomorrow, every Nachri opens up and there's a nissa to teach Nachrim Torah. We're putting it in the hands of Nachrim. How could you teach Bechlal Nachrim Torah? He says when Moses Mendelssohn made his beer, and he says, and look at Moses Mendelssohn. All his kids are not Jewish now. None of them stayed the course. I don't know what that has to do with anything. But again, this is part of his letter. And then number 3. He says, so again, he's upset at translation. And number 3, he holds it's also. He holds that it's lifnei iver. You're not allowed to teach Nachum Torah. It's not a technical thing. Clearly, the Chassam Sofer did not agree with him because the Chassam Sofer gave us Haskama, knowing full well that many German non-Jews are going to be reading this Gemara. Clearly, the Chassam Sofer doesn't have a problem. That means it's the most ridiculous thing in my mind. Again, there is I shouldn't say like that because there is a Mari Assad that holds that translating Sfarim in Lashon Medina is also Gomer. The Mari Assad in Chelik Aleph, Siman Dalet holds that it's also. I don't understand it bechlal. I can't be masig how it could be osir. We have Sfarim and Navi that were written in vernacular. The Gemara was written in vernacular. The Gemara was written in Aramaic. The Rambam wrote his Moreh Nevuchim and his Pirush HaMishnayos in Arabic. We have so many Sfarim that were written in vernacular. You're worried about Nochrim picking them up, so everything should have been osir. Don't you have the biggest raya from the Talmud, from the Rambam, that it's not osir b'chlal? I don't understand b'chlal. And I do believe that Rabbi Menashe Klein in the tshuva about Art Scroll brings this down as a raya to be matter, some of the things that I'm saying now. But these are dvarim pshutim. Miroi pshitusim, you don't even have to say them. I don't understand how it's shaykh b'chlal to be an issa. You're saying something? If anybody wants to talk, you're welcome to.
I'm just saying that Kveger himself subscribed to the beer. He said he's going to pay. He prepaid for a volume, like you talking about before.
Yeah.
And Yehuda arranged for a different translation instead because he didn't like the high German. Nothing to do with the German. Just didn't like
That's
the
true. That's true. But I'm saying, let me ask you a question. What about the Gemara? I'm saying the Gemara is written in Aramaic. It's the most amazing thing. I'm sorry. Ellie, I don't have a clock or a watch, so you'll have to tell me when whatever. I don't have any time telling device right now.
9:37.
Okay, thank you. So
No, the Torah itself has translations.
Yeah, Yogarsa Adusa.
Geld.
Adusa. It's true. No, I'm just saying this. I don't. Ramoshe's Makel. By the way, I don't know where the tshuva is, but I was going to look it up. I forgot to look it up. Ramoshe's Makel, the Sri Dehesh's Makel. Menashe Klein is Mekel, but I think that you need people to be Mekel. It's so pashut, so pashut. The Rambam was written in Arabic. Yes, it's true that the Rambam does write a compendium tshuva many years later that he wished he would have written everything in Lashon Kodesh, not because he's afraid of le'osach ein l'chol goy, just because he felt that the Hebrew language would have been much more expressive and it would have caused the issue of everybody learning Lashon Kodesh. So. Dvars Vasayimach Lemoiser on this. It's a double pashut that Rav Tzvi Shlerin was totally wrong on this, and the Chassam Sofer didn't even entertain this idea. The Chassam Sofer wasn't b'chlal. What the Chassam Sofer did end up worrying about was like this, and this became revealed through Rabbi Greenwald in his Oitzer Nechmad. The Chassam Sofer was worried about Pinner's ability to translate the Talmud. He did feel that putting, like Shadal, he did feel that putting such an overwhelming responsibility in the hand of one person could be much too much. And who says that he's going to come out with the right thing? And all these maskimim that are putting askamas on his sefer, it's going to be a tremendous michshel for Klal. When he asked him, he said, Pinner, he says, I get your Talmud and the Mesilas. I get that you've sat by the Shver a little bit, you're Eger. I get it, but you're really capable of this? No one's capable of this. So he told him, he says, I'm going to do something with the Art Scroll style. I'm going to have a whole bunch of, a cadre of Talmidei Chachamim. They're going to be doing all the research. I'm just going to act as a redactor and an editor. And the Chassam Sofer was very satisfied with it. But Pinner lied. That wasn't the truth. One of the people that he said was going to act as a scribe on hand was Rabbi Nosson Adler from London, who was the Chassam Sofer's rabbi's nephew. When the Chassam Sofer sent him a letter, he found out that it wasn't true. La'adam le'oyev le'nivra. Nosson Adler was never even talked to by Pinner. What Pinner meant was, I'm going to try to get those type of scholars, philologist types, people that know words, but he never did it. He did it all himself. And the Chassam Sofer, when he heard this, he was devastated. He writes a letter. The letter starts off, Chanuni, Chanuni, Shma'uni, Shma'uni, Rabbeisai, Goine Azman, Chachmei Dor V'Darshav. He bet, because he called Pinner. He sent him a letter. He asked him, please give me back the Haskama. Pinner ignored him. When the Chassam Sofer realized, and he said, of the Teichalti, I'm never going to get the letter back. So then he went publicly, and he did something that was extremely, I would say, courageous. We find in Shas where Rava says, "Hen dvarim shamar tosa you be yodai," to get up publicly and to admit, I made a mistake, I did something wrong. It's clear that a lot of it had to do with the pressure that Tzvi Shlerin was applying, and the fact that Tzvi Shlerin felt this would be something terrible. It's also clear that the Chassam Sofer did not agree with Tzvi Shlerin's points. His minor points, the Chassam Sofer did not agree with. But what the Chassam Sofer understood was this was not the job for this individual. This individual was a liar. So at this point, by the time Brachas is going towards printing, Pinner has now run afoul of two of his most important relationships. The Tsar finds out that he's a scoundrel and puts sort of a warrant out for his arrest. If he'll ever step into Russia, the Tsar wants him arrested. Because this is not a venture to teach Jews German, it's a venture to teach Germans Talmud. So he fooled the Tsar and he extorted from the Tsar a tremendous amount of money. And the Chassam Sofer also wants a bounty on his head. The Chassam Sofer doesn't think he's a bad person, he just thinks he misrepresented himself. The Chassam Sofer writes very clearly, Val Dvara Ish Pinner. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I spoke to him. I found him a medaktik b'mitzvahs. I would never put him in cherem unless he will go on and publish my Haskama. Then I would say he's royal lecherem if the malachim and the roisnim of the city would be masking to allow for haram to happen. But they don't, so I can't put him in cherem. The Chassam Sofer was very clear. The individual himself, not a bad individual. I don't see any problem with him. And the truth is the people that did follow Pinner and did investigate him, found him to be a kosher yid, the Shema Torah mitzvahs. The Chassam Sofer's issue was a simple issue. The words. You're not the master of the words. You don't know what the words are saying. Now, what I want to say is like this, that what it boiled down to is that the Chassam Sofer's dedication to the Maimar was so overwhelming. It didn't matter. Pinner was very preoccupied with who the Omer was. He had biographical descriptions of who each individual. The Chassam Sofer was offended by that. The Chassam Sofer's focal point was just the words. The way, what I understand from this Chassam Sofer is that the way the Chassam Sofer approaches Am Yisrael is it's all stripped of the DNA. There is no person anymore. It's the word, the Maimar from the door to the next door to the next door. That's Am Yisrael. Doesn't matter if this person would. Once it's niskabel and it becomes a chulya in the sharsheres of the Messiah, that's it. It becomes part of the Messiah, and there's no more investigation about whether the person was great, not great, greater than who. It's established according to the Klali Apsak that this is how we paskin, then this becomes law. And now the most important focal point is to figure out was steht, not wer hat gesagt, was steht, what says over here. And I see this. I'm gonna mention this point. I see this as probably I would say the core of the disagreement between Rabbi and his son Reb Shimon. It's a famous Gemara in the end of Horius, where the Gemara tells us over there that in the days of Reb Meir and Reb Nosson and Reb Gamliel, there was no division between the cover that was afforded the Av Bezdin and the Nasi and the Rosh Hashiva. Reb Nosson was Rosh Hashiva, Reb Meir was the Av Bezdin, and Reb Gamliel was the Nasi. They would stand up equally for everyone, and Reb Gamliel was very offended by it. He felt that there has to be some sort of division. The hierarchy has to be demarcated properly. So he made a takana that you stand differently for each of them. The Nasi gets a full standing till he sits down, the Av Bezdin gets up and down, and the Rosh Hashiva gets up, Daled Amos, and then sit down. When Rameh and Rav Nosson came in the next day, they saw that they were demoted and their covered status was taken down. They were upset. The Gemara brings down that Rameh and Rav Nosson decided to stage a coup. They were going to show the yeshiva that Rav Gamliel was not really the seat of learning that they are. They were going to show everybody, and they were going to learn Masechta Uktzin, which they were Bakian and he was not, and they were going to be Mavazim Barabim. The grandson of Acher. This is interesting because Rav Meir is Acher's Talmud. Acher's grandson is against Rav Meir over here. The Gemara tells us in Kiddushin Daf Mem Amid Beis that Yaakov ben Karshi was the bar bitoi of Acher. He was Acher's grandson. So this young Talmud, Yaakov ben Karshi, says if Rav Meir, he heard the plot, if Rav Meir and Rav Nosson are going to sit and discuss Uktzin in front of the Talmidim, and they're going to ask Rav Gamliel to say a Shiur in Uktzin, Dilmachas v'shalom, he's going to become very embarrassed. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be a bizarre natar. So he went and he sat in the room where Rav Gamliel prepares Shiur, and the Koil Ram, he started learning Masechta Uktzin. Everybody knows sometimes you're sitting in the Beis Medrash, you have a drake up learning on top of his lungs. You can't get a word in. So Rav Gamliel doesn't want to waste time. He sits and he listens to the Uktzin that Yaakov ben Karshi is saying out a whole afternoon. Next day, he comes in and they start asking him, they pepper him with Uktzin questions. He says, I figured it out. You were gonna do this to me. And what he does is he throws Rav Meir and Rav Nosson out. Okay, the Gemara brings down a back and forth till they finally gained entry. But from then on, they were called Acherim. Acherim and Yesharim. They were never mentioned by name because Chas v'sholom, they had almost the ability to destroy the whole concept of the Nesius. So the Gemara brings down a very interesting discussion. The Gemara says, Masni le Rebbe le Reb Shimon Berei. Rebbe learns with Reb Shimon his son, and he says the word Achera Maimrim. It's a memory in the Gemara and Tamura. It's not relevant what the memory is. So Reb Shimon turns to Rebbe, young Shimon turns to Rebbe, and he says, Mi eile, who are these people? Shemeimeim anu shoysim u'shmeiseim ein anu maskirim. We're drinking their waters, but we won't mention. Oh, he says, Allah l'bnei adam shebikshu lakar kvoidcha v'kvoid beis avicha. These are people that could have destroyed you. So young Reb Shimon says to him, yeah, but it's over. He says, Gam sinosam, gam avosam, gam kinosam, the sinna, the ava, the kina, kvar avda, it's all gone, it's all gone, it's over. It's over, it's over. So Rebbe responds back, he says, no. He says, Oyev tamu, charabas lanetzach. Even if the enemy is gone, but the swords remain forever. Again, Reb Shimon goes back at his father. He says, that's only if they were successful. They weren't successful. What's the back and forth? I think the back and forth is a simple back and forth. Rebbe said, it's not only the Maimer, it's also the Oimer. It also has to do with who's saying. Wer sagt, was sagt er? It's all connected. And Reb Shimon says, no, it's only the Maimer. Once the person wasn't matzliach, it doesn't matter what the history was, it doesn't matter what happened, it's irrelevant to the Messiah. We keep moving, and therefore now you mention him by name, you don't reveal the different things that happened then, they're not relevant, they're not germane to the Messiah. And the halacha is like Reb Shimon over here, because the Gemara tells us we move on, and we take to start mentioning Reb Meir, we take to start mentioning Reb Nosson. And that I think was the Chassam Sofer's mevukash over here. He was upset with the history and he was upset with all the bells and whistles that he felt were not b'chlal a chelik of the Messiah. The Messiah is completely contingent on words. We're a people of words. We're Asar Mamoris type of Yidden. It's all about Yehuda Arya di Modina. We'll do next week. Is the antithesis of this Chassam Sofer. He analyzes personalities. He analyzes individuals. One person I'd like to spend a little time on next week is Rav Abba Bar Minyumi. There's 3 or 4 Gemaras about him, and Modina puts them together and says this was a villainous individual. And anybody that sees understands that it's not the case. But the idea that you have a right to back up all the way into, you can back your truck into 6, 7 dairies before you, or 16 dairies before you, and you could just manipulate and move people around, unacceptable to the Chassam Sofer, and unacceptable, I would say, in our system of Messiah. Okay, we'll stop here with this, and we'll continue next week, Tuesday. What time is it now?
Yeah, it's 48, 9:48.
All right.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My internet came on less than a minute before it was over. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've been without internet.